Now let's look at inequalities and interval notation. So when we're talking about interval notation, the first thing we have to think about is the difference between greater than and strictly greater than. So if you look at x is greater than or equal to 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, that suggests that it's all numbers which are 3 or greater than 3. The key here is it includes 3. And the way that we signify that is with a closed dot. If you think, look right there. If on the other hand it was x would be greater than 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, we want to suggest that it's all numbers which are greater than 3 but not including 3. So the way we would draw that is an open dot and a shading to the left. So this is the idea of open and closed dots. Sometimes this is called strictly greater to distinguish it between simply greater. What interval notation does is uses not open dots and closed dots, but brackets. So we're going to use a bracket where this is going to be the equivalent of a closed dot or a closed point, and this is going to be the equivalent of an open dot. So this suggests that it includes 3 in this case, and this suggests that it doesn't. And sometimes you see this actually on a graph itself. So if that's 3 right there, then we would draw a little bracket like that and then shade it in. And because this is a closed bracket, that means the same as a closed dot. Whereas if you had the exact same thing, but you had an open parentheses suggests an open dot. So this simply means x is greater than or equal to 3. How do we know 3? 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this would mean x is strictly greater than 3. So let's go to interval notation. So let's start from this. Let's start from a problem where we have a graph and then go to the notation. So here we have it. Let's put a 0 here. And let's shade this in. Let's shade in a dot here, closed dot, and then an open dot, and shade everything between. And then let's do another one here and further, right? So let's read that and translate it. So the question will say, write an interval notation, tough word. And they'll give you a question that looks like this. And sometimes they'll do the reverse. Sometimes they'll give you the notation and ask you to draw the picture. But let's look at this. If this is 0, then that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4. And if you notice, 4 is included because it's a closed dot. And then it's 1, 2. So 2 is not included. That's a minus 4, excuse me. It's minus 4. And that's included, and a 2 is not. So the way we draw that is you want to do intervals always by having the leftmost number being the more negative number. So in this case, it goes between minus 4, comma 2. The comma means between. So we look at the interval from minus 4 to 2. Now we want to notate that, or denote that we are including minus 4. So we're going to use a closed bracket there. And then we're not going to include 2, so we're going to put an open parentheses there. So if we read this, the way that we read this is start at minus 4, end at 2, This closed bracket means include the beginning point. So in this case, include minus 4. Don't include 2. So that's the way we read that. We read it, start at minus 4, include minus 4, go to 2, but do not include 2. And there you're done. Let's do the second part of the interval. The second part of the interval, let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to start at 7. And how far are we going to go? We're going to go forever. So we're going to go towards infinity. Sometimes people put a plus infinity there to make sure they realize that they're going in a positive direction. Now, do we include the point 7? It's a closed dot. Since it's a closed dot, we are going to include it, so that's going to be a closed bracket. And then we're going to go to infinity. Does it include infinity or not? That's kind of a philosophical question. People just use open parentheses there. So now but now we have two parts here, so we need to put an and in between. So this symbol here simply means and. That's U for union, and it just means and. And that's going to be your interval notation. So this is your final answer right here. And that's going to be the interval notation for this particular graph. Let's go the other way around. Let's say we start with the notation. So let's go from minus infinity to 2 included. Let's graph that real quick. So let's draw a number line. Let's put a 0 on here just to know where to start. So the first number will always be the most negative number. The most negative number is negative infinity, which means you're going to go forever in the left-hand direction. And you're going to go all the way to 2. So there's 2 right there. But we need to think about whether or not we include 2. So we go from minus infinity to 2. And since this is a closed bracket, that means we are going to include 2. So that means it's going to be a closed dot. So we draw a closed dot there. And then that's going to be our graph. Let's do another example. Let's graph this time 3, infinity. And let's make it open parentheses. 3, open parentheses, 3, parentheses, open parentheses. What that means is you start at 3, you're going to end at infinity. Okay, so let's plot those. Draw a number line. Put a 0 somewhere. So 3 is our first point that we need to worry about. So there's 3 right there. Are we going to include 3? In this case, we're not going to include 3. So we want an open dot at 3. And we're going to go from 3 to infinity, to positive infinity, which means we're going to go in this direction. And how far we're going to go? We're going to go forever. And that's how you do it. Let's make that a little more complicated. Let's say that we had minus 5, comma, minus 1. Let's take that open, closed, union, 3, comma, infinity. So let's look at that for a minute. Well, first of all, what we notice here is this part is exactly the same, right? 3, infinity. So we graph that exactly the same. So 3, there's positive infinity, so it goes between 3 and positive infinity. It's an open parentheses, so it's an open dot. Let's graph the rest of it. This union means that we're going to do for a combination of 2. So we go minus 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a minus 5, and there's a minus 1. So we're going to have an open dot at the minus 5. How do we know it's open dot? Because it's open parentheses. And it's going to go to minus 1. And that's going to be a closed dot. So let's do this in the same color pen. Let's draw an open dot at minus 5 and a closed dot at minus 1. And then we're going to shade everything in between. If you notice, what does this mean? This means between minus 5 and minus 1. Not including minus 5. Not including because it's a open parentheses. Including minus 1 because it's a closed parentheses. You're also going to shade 3 and to infinity. And that's how you do graphing with how you do interval notation.